Live from Houston, Texas, this is Big Ideas, Small Business with your hosts, Brian Gendron and Shavonnah Robert Schreiber. And now, the music of Max Flynn.
Starting to feel a little crazy again. I think it's time I start to pack my things. The city life has really got me down.
All right. Welcome to Big Ideas, Small Business. This is a show by business owners, for business owners, entrepreneurs, side hustlers. We're here to get you in business and keep you in business. I'm Brian Gendron, joined by Shavonnah Robert Schreiber. How are you?
I am doing well. You see my fancy, I wore this for you, my fancy raincoat.
Very nice. It is raining here in Houston, Texas. I wore these glasses for you. I know you usually wear glasses. A quick plug. Hey, quick plug. These are blue light blockers. We're spending a lot of time in front of the screen. This helps keep your eyes, because those are some of the most important organs in our body, right?
That's right.
You can't stay in business if you can't see it. All right. So how's things for you? You doing okay?
I am doing okay. We're in that time, we're in the stretch now. That September, we're midway through the month. So we're in that stretch where this is it. This is the time to make the balance of the year, the best it can be. And so we're definitely focused on that over here at SNR Creative. What about you? How's it going?
Wonderful. Yes, absolutely. This is an opportunity for our business and technology to start our fall sort of pickup season, where things start to pick up a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And this year is no exception to that, even with everything going on in an election year and pandemics and all that stuff.
Just that. No big deal.
Yeah, those things. Seasonality still remains intact. So busy as always. Yes, absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, our guest for today is quite the busy one. I'm so happy that Bill's joining us today. And I know he's going to tell all of us a little bit more about himself, and he's probably going to be quite modest, but he has a very impressive resume. And for those that are joining us today live, please go and check out his LinkedIn profile and to learn a bit more about him. For example, he was a VP of sales for 8 times. I mean, I've worked in sales, and to be a VP 8 times, he's a pretty young guy too. And twice the CMO at GM. And yeah, I mean, I just feel like he has such an impressive background. So I can't wait to hear from him. But really the thing I'm most impressed about is that we found him via LinkedIn. Well, he found us on LinkedIn. So for anyone who does not think that LinkedIn and social networking is valuable and that it works, I'm here to tell you that you should consider changing your belief, because we're going to hear from a great speaker today, our guest on the show, and all because he reached out on LinkedIn. He said he heard a little bit about us and thought, this seems like a good podcast. So kudos to you, Brian, because I'm saying that it was probably your smile that won him over. But yeah, so he's going to join us today.
Well, let's go ahead and bring him in. This is the Chief Catalyst of Catalyst Growth Advisors and author of a book, Further, Faster, which we're going to talk about here today, Mr. Bill Flynn. Bill, how are you?
Hey, guys. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Actually, and Shavonnah, it was your smile that got me on LinkedIn. I actually, although Brian and I, it seems like we have a lot of history in common, family and geography and that kind of stuff. But I was looking forward to it. Yeah, I looked and I'm just trying to get the message out of the book, and it's your audience, are the right people for the book. So I thought I'd give it a go. So I thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. Okay. So Bill, you heard, I gave a very, very high level overview of some of the things that I find most impressive about you. Is there anything else, or maybe something that's not in your bio, that you want to share with our audience today?
So I'll share what I think is impressive about me.
Yeah. Modesty. That's what we made modesty.
So I basically had 2 careers. One was a startup career. I did 10 of them over 25 years. I was 5 for 6 at one point, and I wasn't smart enough to stop there. So I still ended up with about a 50% hit rate, which is still very decent.
That's very
in the startup world. I've been through 2 IPOs, 7 acquisitions, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided to become a business coach. I asked myself, do I want to do an 11th startup? And the answer was yes. I love doing startups. I love the sort of the white page, the open sort of the open fields, if you will. But I was having a hard time. I'm not a founder. I'm the operations guy. So I usually come in and scale the thing. That's why it's sort of sales, marketing, you saw, service, basically a COO. The only company I ever founded was this one, which is basically I work for myself. So I'm not sure if that's considered founding, but why not? And I found it was just difficult to really find what I call a Goldilocks founder. And to me, a Goldilocks founder is crazy, but not too crazy. And I was having a hard time. So I said, you know what, I'm going to try this business coach thing. And I'm really glad I did, because I knew what a calling was intellectually, but I'm definitely in a calling. I love what I do. The time flies. I would do it for free, and I often do it for free. So
don't say that too. Wait a minute. Don't say that too loud, Bill, but understood.
Yeah, no problem. So that's my deal.
Well, great. Okay, so let's just dive right in. So first of all, I know how long it takes to write a book. Here at SNR Creative, we do a little bit of book publishing also. So I understand that it takes a long time, or it takes time for sure. It's not something that you do in a weekend in most cases. And the title of your book, I thought, man, it almost seems like he had some unique insight into what was going to be happening in our world right now, because further, faster. And I mean, I just think that's great. And then just for everyone's reference, the rest of the title is The Vital Few Steps That Take the Guesswork Out of Growth. And I just think that's great. So here we are in this very interesting time in business, for any kind of business in America and really in the world. Tell us a little bit about this book. What was the idea to get you, how did it come to be? What was the genesis of Further, Faster?
Yeah, so I've done a bunch of startups. I'm an advisor to dozens and dozens of companies. As Brian and I were talking off air, I've been a speaker. I've spoken in front of hundreds and hundreds of CEOs, and not in big groups, in sort of like Vistage EO kind of settings, YPO, where it's 10, 15. So it's really interactive. I don't speak so much as I do a workshop. Mm-hmm. And what I found over those 25, 30 years, I've also been I'm a huge fan of business. I think it's, they say there's only two things we generally do in life. We love and we work. And so we spend most of our adult life at work. And most people don't love what they work. I was just listening to a Harvard professor. Her name is Francesca Gino, who's written a bunch of books on engagement, et cetera. And she said, look, we've looked at the data across the world, and most people's life at work sucks. Her words. And I just think that's a shame. So one of the things that my brain seems to do pretty good at is I seem to find patterns in things. And I've found that after all this research, I read tons of books and I've looked into business for a long time, and I study success more than failure. And the success that I studied, there are just a few things that most great leaders and businesses do, and they do them really, really well. And these are, Herb Kelleher at Southwest, Alan Mulally at Ford, pick your leader, Walton at Walmart. If you look at the leaders and companies that last generations and sometimes centuries, and you look back, what do? They do just a few things right. And that's what I wrote the book about. I said, what are those things? And they're really three things, which is performance is a team sport. There's been a worldwide study on teams, and 83% of the people in the study, almost 20,000 people in that study, said they were on at least one team. 70% of those people were on two teams or more. Teams get almost everything done in business. So you really have to focus on that. And we don't teach people how to be good team leaders, and that's a skill. So that's one of it. The other is you have to build a system. If you want to grow a business on a scalable, predictable way, it has to be systematic. If you're just doing it haphazardly, then eventually you're going to hit a wall. And this is why most businesses fail. You have if you started a business in 1995, you had a 50% chance of it lasting 5 years. You had a 25% chance of it lasting 15 years. And you'd think it would be the opposite, right? You get better at it, you're doing it a while. Right. But that isn't what the data show. So you have to understand that strategy and execution are the two sides of the same coin. And you have to build that as a system. Simon Sinek, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, and he's written a book called The Infinite Game. That's what it means.
Brian's favorite. It's
an infinite game. You have strategy, you execute it, and then you fix your strategy and you execute it, and then you find more holes in your strategy, and then something changes and you have to modify your strategy. You have to keep getting it better and better. And then lastly, if you want to grow your business, Cash should be your primary financial growth metric. Why is that? Because most people talk about revenue, right? Revenue is vanity. Remember, I'm a 30-year sales guy. Revenue does not matter, other than bragging to your brother-in-law or telling a reporter or whatever. But if you want to grow a business, you have to invest in front of growth. And cash is the only metric on your P&L or your balance sheet that will not lie to you. And you need to understand, how much will it cost me to grow this business over the next 2 or 3 years? Okay, now how do I do that? How do I build my business to make that much money so I can invest in my business? People don't do that. And then we're finding, unfortunately, we've had 3 crises of this magnitude in 20 years. We had 9/11, we had 2008, and now we have COVID. And we don't learn our lesson. We spend as if we had the money without actually having it. You should have at least now probably 6 to 12 months of operating capital in the bank. I recommend that to all my clients. Not easy to do, but it's for these reasons. And guess what? It's going to happen again. Stats say within 7 years, we will have another one. So let's start preparing now. And that gets to the book, which is, that's why I wrote the book. And that's why I put the book out now, because, you know, I'm happy to make money on the book, but you can download it from my site for free. I just want people to at least know what I know, and hopefully they can learn something from it and maybe take a good tidbit or two. And the book isn't just a book, it's a do-it-yourself book, and it has 25 exercises on my website that go along with the book. And you can just go along with the book and sort of do it all yourself. You can hire someone like me as a coach or whatever, but you can certainly do it yourself. So that's a quarter answer to a nickel question, but
So I was able to get to the introduction, and like you said, it's more of a workbook, but I was skeptical coming into the book, and I'm like, okay, this is another business coach that's writing a book about how to grow my business quickly. But you disarmed me very quickly in a couple of different ways, very well researched, and also you paid homage to some people that came before you, whether it's Fern Harnish, Cameron Harold, and a few others. But there's a few things that really jumped out at me and piqued my interest and makes me want to explore this further, Bill. And that's you mentioned the change process, decision-making process, two critical things. You're obviously a COO guy, but the one that stopped me in my tracks was this concept of neuro leadership. And so I'd really like to hear a little bit more about that. And I think that would be very helpful for a lot of the entrepreneur type folks that listen to this show.
Sure. So neuroleadership, just so we can sort of define it, is basically easily defined, which is leading with the brain in mind. We all have brains, and our brains are generally the same. And what we've found is we're all a little crazy. It's just the way we are, right? We're impulsive, we're irrational, and we're highly emotional beings. That's just who we are. If you as a leader do not understand at least the basics of the brain, how it works, how we receive feedback, how the brain learns, you're not as good a leader as you can be. You're probably not as compassionate as you should be to yourself and to others, because we're full of all these biases. And there's supposedly 150 biases that we have that have been discovered. Most of them are outside of our conscious awareness. There's a great phrase I heard, which is, we are not rational beings, we are rationalizing beings. So that's what neuroleadership is. It's really understanding that process. And there's a story I tell, which most of us get, and I'll try to tell it quickly, is that, so say, Brian, you're in a meeting. Let's say the 3 of us are in a meeting, and you're running the meeting, Brian, and Shavonnah is your boss. Okay. And you finish the meeting, and she taps you on the shoulder and says, Brian, I have a few things I want to mention to you about the meeting. Can you follow me back to my office? And then what happens? Right? Your brain's going, what did I do wrong? Oh my God, you're running through all the meeting. How am I going to answer this? Then you're saying, then you start to catastrophize, right? And you're saying, oh my God, am I going to be in trouble? Am I going to get fired? If I get fired, am I not be able to send the kids to school? We're going to move to that house. What about that vacation we're going to take? So by the time you sit across the desk from her, which by the way is a status symbol because you're going to her office, and she's behind the desk, another status symbol, your brain is in full threat mode. And you probably aren't really hearing her, even though what she says might be good. But by the time you're there, your brain is already in full threat mode.
It's like an out of body experience. In those situations.
Yeah, it happens, right? Your vision actually narrows. You start sweating, or because your body's saying, "Get the hell out of here, run away." That's what it's saying. But because it doesn't know the difference between a physical threat and a social threat, and it misinterprets signals because its job is to keep you alive. And it's better to get away from things than it is to put yourself in a situation. So here's what you could have done instead, Shavonnah.
Yes, tell me.
You could have said, Brian, hey, you could have sat down next to him and said, Brian, that was a pretty good meeting. But as you know, one of our core values is continued improvement, Kaizen, right? So here's what I want to do is put a lunch or a coffee on my calendar. And I'd like you to come to that with, say, 2 or 3 things that you thought went really well in the meeting that we want to strengthen. I want you to come 1 or 2 things that, if we improve them a little bit, it would make the meeting better. I'll do the same thing. And we're going to meet week after week until we make this the best meeting it could ever be. Now, the outcome is generally hopefully the same, right? It's a better meeting. But you didn't trigger threat to Brian at all, right?
Yeah.
We're doing this together, etc. I
think that's great. And I think that, from thinking about this concept from a leadership perspective, I think this is why it's interesting, the name of your book is Further Faster, but if you're moving too quickly, if you don't build in those mental pauses for yourself, and there are a lot of ways that you can do that. So as a leader, you're giving this feedback because it's top of mind and you think I must say this right now because I don't want to forget, not realizing, to the point that you made, giving the feedback in that moment, or even suggesting something like, without giving much feedback, can you come to my office, which is actually not saying much at all. It can get someone in this heightened sense of threat and really undermine team building, undermine trust in a relationship, in that working relationship. And I think that it's definitely something that I've seen happen a lot of times, something I try not to do, but I'm sure I've done it. And it's like autopilot. So you have to build in, like I said, those pauses, mental pauses. So when you're hearing a presentation or whatever, observing someone on your team, that you don't react in that very moment and that you really consider your response, right? So that, to me, as I listen to you walk through in this scenario, what would have been a better way to approach it? For me, talking to Brian in our example, it would have been definitely to consider how my words are going to be received before I even say them. And I think that's something that doesn't happen enough, for sure. Yeah, and we do it unwittingly often, right? We don't do it on purpose. Sometimes we do. You want to be sort of intimidating or whatever. That's your style. But not you, but of course not you. You're a wonderful human being. I can see the halo behind you on the thing. But that's what I want to remind leaders. And I've been studying the brain for 15 years, mostly because I was a sales guy, and I wanted to learn about the brain because when you are in a sales situation, you should understand how the brain makes decisions, and the brain does not make decisions the way we think it does. So I learned that, and once I did that, I became the best salesperson wherever I went. I was number 1 or number 2 at every company I was at. And then I became the leader. I taught all my guys this. I said, here, this is how the brain makes decisions. This is how you need to do this. Now, I said, you need to be honest and responsible because you're basically manipulating the other person, right? But I want you to do it for the right reason. The marketer in me said, are we manipulating or are we guiding? I guess you could, manipulation. You could. Well, when you skew towards evil, then I think you're manipulating. When you're for goodness, right? You're guiding. You're guiding. So, exactly. There's a fine line.
I was gonna. So more of the pop culture type version of this is how to win friends and influence people. Right. More on the sales side. But if you really want to deep geek out on this, Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow is a great resource. Mode 1, mode 2 thinking, and why we think the way that we do, and then how do you apply that for management. So this is all great, Bill. I think this is really relevant. This is something I'm always checking myself on as a younger appearing person. My first leadership role, my management role, was a disaster with no training. So I'm relying purely on instinct, and our instinct is to do things just like the example you gave. And so it sounds like your book has a lot of help for young salespeople, young leaders to work through some of that. Well, and I was actually going to say, in that vein, why do you, in your experience, Bill, as an entrepreneur, it's some of the things that you talk about in your book
these are like counterintuitive to the things that people have heard for years and years and years are what you need to do and how you need to behave in order to be successful in business. I mean, even what you said earlier about having, cash being king. I mean, I've heard that since, being an undergraduate. I mean, that for a long time ago, that's always been a thing, but then that bumps up against Silicon Valley, and that bumps up against a lot of literature and resources that you can consume that tell you it's all about your valuation and it's all about versus the tangible thing. Do you actually have the money to finance this operation? So in your experience, what are some of the tips that, at high level that you give entrepreneurs who say, okay, I hear you, Bill, but it's really hard for me to change my behavior because I've heard, it's almost been drilled into my head in order to be successful. I need to do the opposite of what you're saying. So what are some of the things that you tell people to help them over that hurdle?
Well, first I would back up and say, are you a startup or are you a scale-up? Because a startup is not the same as a scale-up. So I'm a big, huge fan of Steve Blank. If you're familiar with this guy, he's sort of the godfather of startups.
Yep.
And he has a great saying, which is a startup is a temporary organization in search of a business model. And my advice to startup entrepreneurs that haven't gotten through that knothole, and I've gotten through that knothole 7 times, probably. I'd say 3 of them we didn't quite make it through the knothole. The founder probably thought we did, but I didn't think we did. You only really have 2 problems that you have to solve. Everything else is ancillary, right? And usually is distracting. One is you need to figure out to solve a problem worth solving, and solving it in a way that enough people will pay you enough money to make a real business out of it. And once you do, and you're doing that, while you're doing that, do not run out of money. Those are the only 2 things you have to worry about. I mean, culture is great and core values, those are wonderful things, but you're so small, they actually happen organically. Mm-hmm. But once you get through the knothole, you must then revisit all the key decisions you made, because you made, as you said, you sort of hinted at, Brian, you made some decisions that were probably more about keeping the company alive, which is important, right? Don't run out of cash. You need payroll, all that kind of stuff. But you don't have to do that anymore. You have some predictability. You have some scalability in your business. And now it's about creating systems and processes to grow. And profit and cash are the way you get there. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to flip your company, right? My wife loves HGTV, right? And the guy that comes in, the people from Texas, right? Who are the funny guy and his wife. I can't remember.
Joanna, are you talking about the game?
The games, right? They're about keeping your house good and lovely, etc., and staying there, or building a house so you're there forever. And then there's the 2 people who hate each other that flip the house, right?
Yeah.
The Tariq, I forget what their names are, right?
Yeah.
Those are 2 different scenarios, right? If you want to flip a company, then yes, you're about growth. You're about showing your investors that you can grow fast and then sell so you can make money in 3 or 4 years. Remember, I'm a startup guy. We flipped companies. It was never anywhere more than 3 or 4 years. That's a different model than what I'm talking about in my book. This is if you want to grow a sustainable business that in essence can live on beyond you, then you want to do things a certain way. If you want to be part of Silicon Valley, I think it's a little bit of a fantasy land anyway. And a lot of bad habits have come out of Silicon Valley, but that's a whole other show. You need to do a few things really well. And again, it's about team, system, and cash. If you can do team, system, and cash, then you put yourself in the best chance to have a sustainable business that your employees love going to, that you enjoy every day, and that your customers get a lot of value out of.
That's spot on. That's spot on. And I think, one of the things that we talk about, Brian, a lot is getting clear on what it is that, as a business owner, and for our audience, what is it that you're setting out to do? And so, Bill, I think that was great how, one, understanding what type of business you're in and what's the vision, what's the vision for it? Because then based on whatever that vision is, that will dictate the decisions that you need to make now. So let's talk a little bit about, so how do you when you say take the guesswork out of growth? And I know we talked about the 3 big areas, but is there anything else you would add to that for people who are like, okay, I got it. I need to work as a team. I need to make sure that I have systems, that I need to make sure I don't run out of money. I think I got that, but it's almost like it's too simple. Is there something else that is worth at least keeping in mind?
Yeah, well, you just described the tip of the iceberg, and most of the iceberg is underneath, right? So we talked a little bit about neuroleadership, so I'll sort of skip the team stuff. There's a lot more stuff, and I'm a huge fan of Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall and 9 Lives About Work. And I think, they and Amy Edmondson and a whole bunch of other people have really focused on teams and how really important they are. And I can do it with my own experience. I definitely got to be a better and better team leader. And one of my experiences, one of the reasons I'm a coach is that due to a circumstance, I had to create a really good team around me and have me be sort of their guide to teach them how to fish as opposed to fish for them. Mm-hmm. And it worked wonderfully. It was sort of an EOS kind of like solution. Is I basically made up my own. I wasn't smart enough to know that there was, E-Myth and it's like 23 different business operating systems out there today. Vern's is just one of many. But it worked really well. And I knew it worked really well because by 11 o'clock every morning before I left, I was there for 17, 18 months after I took over. I was there for about 4 years total. And I was done by 11 o'clock in the morning. I had nothing to do for my job. All my reports were done. All my one-on-ones were done. So I managed by walking around. I went to more conferences and I learned and I brought stuff back and the business grew and the people were happy and our customers were happier, et cetera. So, that's definitely an important thing to do. But here's something I've done. And up until recently, I was a Vistage speaker. So I've been in front of about 400 or 500 CEOs in the last 3 or 4 years. And I would ask them really basic questions. So let's talk about strategy. First, I would ask them, could you give me a definition of the word? And they would write it down, and then I would have them all go around, 13, 14 of them. And guess what? These are some pretty serious business owners. These guys have been second, third, fourth generation, tens, hundreds, a few were $1 billion in size. And they all had different definitions of the word. Then I said, okay, well, that's interesting. So, it was a plan, it was a thing, it was that, it was whatever. And I have sort of an amalgamated version of strategy, which kind of takes Porter, Drucker, and a little bit of me, and I put it all together. So I would give them my definition. And then I said, okay, now that we got that, you can decide what strategy is to you. Now, I would like to ask you this. If I came into your office on 10 o'clock Monday morning and went into your senior leadership team meeting, and I said to your leaders that were sitting around with you, could you write down in your own words your definition of what our company's strategy is? And I said, if I had them read it out loud, Mr. CEO, what would happen? And I almost always get a smile or a laugh. They'd be, it would be all over the place. I said, yeah. I said, that's a problem. You can have a vision, which is great, right? This is what it looks like. And I love Cameron Hill's book. I actually give Cameron's book to every single leader, every single CEO I work with. I just give it to him and say, you have 3 months to do this because your team wants this from you. Mm-hmm. They want to know, where are we going? And you need to describe it. But you also have to have a strategy to get there, right? What are the things that we're going to do? And I said, look, and here's what's going on. If you 4 or 5 people you're not on the same page, imagine how everyone else is outside of this outside of this room. They're confused. They don't know what they're doing, what it's good for. Am I helping? Am I not helping? Am I just here for a check? So you've got to really understand, what is your strategy? And that's not easy. Strategy is probably, other than trying to manage people, which is super hard, because again, we're all a little crazy. Strategy is the next hardest thing. Right? It's because.
So what's your definition? What's your definition of strategy? Give us your definition.
Yeah, sure. So my definition of strategy is a unique market position involving a differentiating set of variables, an independent set of variables that predictably produce a profitable customer. That is what strategy is to me, right? And unique is one word. The best strategies are unique. If you're just trying to be better than everyone else, that is really, really hard. Every day for the rest of your life, just to be a little bit better. Guess what? They're coming after you and they're going to beat you and then, et cetera. But if you can be unique, like Southwest or Dyson or Nest, or, pick your unique strategy out there, you're in a lot better position.
That is a part in your intro of your book that got me excited. Was I looked at a business that I launched, and it was kind of a Me Too business, right? And it was a struggle. It's a hustle because you're just the same as everybody else. I'm like, I'm going to market better.
Yeah.
So that ain't a strategy. That is not unique. But so now I'm in a different project, and I'm finding these little niche areas where I can be unique and have a different product offering. And although it might be a little bit harder because it's not as proven and the roadmap's not laid out, and there's not all these resources that tell you how to do it because you're kind of creating it as you go. Yep. If this business model proves out, now I've got a unique product, and I can come up with something closer to your definition of strategy than my previous one.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you can do it the other way. It's just a lot harder.
It is.
And what I've found is that, so I'm also a fan of Jobs to be Done. Are you guys familiar with Jobs to be Done?
I'm not.
No.
So this has been around since the 80s. It came out of the quality movement in the 80s in the car market. Mm-hmm. And there are a bunch of people who say they started it. I don't really know. I don't really care. But the biggest proselytizer of it was Clayton Christensen. If you're familiar with Clayton, he just passed away, but he was a Harvard business professor for many, many years, has a bunch of businesses. And the story that really tells you what Jobs to be Done is, so basically the premise is people don't buy your product. They hire it to do a job that they want done. Mm-hmm. And then if something else comes along that does it better or cheaper or whatever, then they fire your product and hire that one. And the example that he gives is a milkshake. So his organization was hired by some McDonald's franchise owner, and said, "Look, I'm trying to sell more milkshakes." And he said, "Okay, tell me, what did you do?" He said, "Well, what we did is we went out and we talked to all of our customers. We asked them, what would we have to do in order for you to buy more milkshakes?" Mm-hmm. He said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, they told us." He said, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, we did everything they said." "And what happened to sales?" "Nothing. Didn't move." So he said, "Okay." So he said, what I want to do is I'm going to talk to your customers and I'm going to ask them a few questions. So the next day he came back and he and his team asked them, "Why did you hire this milkshake for you?" And what they found was that most of them had a long commute. They weren't hungry yet. And they wanted something to help their drive be a little bit better. And they said, "Okay." So he went back the next day and further on that day, he also said he found out that there were two constituencies. One was the people in the morning with the commute, and then the people in the afternoon. 75% of all milkshakes were purchased either before 8 o'clock or somewhere between 3 and 5. 75%. And what he found out was that the commuter was one, but the second one was dad. And dad was with the kid after school, with the kids.
That's me.
After sports.
That's me.
Yeah. And he wanted to be kind of cool. He wanted to be the cool dad.
My kids get green smoothies, man. I'm a different kind of dad. They don't even drink milk. They drink nut milk in my house. But
okay, well, you're probably not this consumer for these people. You're probably the wrong guy.
I'm not average. Yeah.
Sorry, my laptop was losing its power. So he said, and so what he did, he said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." In the morning, they didn't change the flavor. They didn't do all the things the customers said. They changed the way they delivered the product. So one of the things they also complained about was, hey, it takes a while. Sometimes the line is really long when I get here, right? If I'm in a Starbucks or whatever in the morning, sometimes it's 10, 12, 15 cars long. So he said, "Great. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a little counter and we're going to have places where the milkshakes are. We're going to have a card swipe. They can come through. They don't have to talk to anybody. They grab the milkshake and go." Guess what happened in the morning? Sales went up.
Yep.
So in the afternoon, same product, right? Same exact product. He said, "Okay, we're going to change how it's packaged because it was kids." And Brian, if you got kids, right? And we don't have the gross motor control, and those cups were pretty crappy, and they would squish and the things would spill. And so they put it in more of a sippy cup thing with a bigger straw. And they made it smaller so dad didn't feel as guilty. And guess what happened? Sales went up.
So that's a great story.
Yeah.
That's a great story. So, okay, I know we can talk forever. I know we're coming up on our time. So I have one question, and it also could be a little bit of a lengthy answer. I mean, right now, so some of the things we talked about, these are things that if you're in business, period, you should be thinking about, right? You should understand the type of business that you have. Are you a startup or are you a scale up? What are you looking to do to your business? Also making sure that you have your teams and your systems, and then also cash to finance whatever the growth is. So those are things that you're like, okay, yeah, when times are good, for sure, these make sense. What would you say differently, if anything, right now when this economy and this world is in a odd place? And as you said, we've been through something similar before. So is there anything that you would add to that 3-point, tip of the iceberg, or not?
Yeah. So COVID, so I'm part of about several hundred coaches around the world, and our general purpose is to help people, right? It's many of us have already been successful, and we're doing this because we love it, and we want to help people. It's not necessarily just about making a buck. So we got together and said, well, how can we help these people? Because many of our clients were either going out of business or struggling or just freaking out. Mm-hmm. So a lot of us gave away our time for free, et cetera. But we also came up with a checklist and said, okay, if you're in COVID, here's what you need to do. We did this back in March. And the first thing we said, and it's on my website if you want to look it up. It's COVID resources, and there's a framework there, and then there's a checklist. But the checklist is pretty simple. First is safety, right? This is a health situation. Just make sure that you set up a situation where your team, your family, yourself, your partners, your stakeholders are as safe as they possibly can be. Right? You can't guarantee everything. And the next thing is cash, right? So when COVID hit March, whatever. I got hit really hard. 93% of all my income went away. I didn't bill for 3 months. And my business was doubling every year. And I was heading to a really good year, probably the best year I've ever had, except one year where I sold a boatload of stock. And I did it. I did the same thing. I took my advice. I got my expenses. I cut them 70, 80%. Which was easy because most of mine was travel, so I wasn't going to travel. But I also I applied for the PPP loan. I tried to get cash from my clients. I also gave away my time, and I worked it so I could survive. Because sometimes you have to survive. We have no idea how long this is going to go. Supposedly, we're not even halfway through this yet, which is crazy. So you can't plan for every contingency, but knowing what you've been through, if you've been through 9/11, you've been through 2008, you know about how long you needed, what your burn rate was. So make sure that you have that in the bank. And probably add another month to the worst scenario that ever had, because why not? So that's usually what I have. And there's like 9 or 10 other things, but your job now is to make sure you have cash, and then you have to be creative. You have to figure out, again, by going back to your customers, am I solving a problem we're solving? You're almost acting like a startup again. Okay, what are your biggest struggles? Maybe I can help you with one of those. Okay, and then I could potentially make a business out of it. I know a bunch of people who changed what they were doing, and it wasn't just making masks or whatever. They modified their model. But some you can. One of my clients is a study abroad business. There's nothing they can do. Yeah. No one's studying abroad. So there's some people who are going to suffer. But that's generally been my advice is, safety first, cash, and then figure out, okay, how can I be creative? And the one question I always ask is, if they haven't done this already, then I would say, have a brainstorming session with your team that says, okay, what if we started the company today? How would we do it? Now we've got all this great knowledge. We've got all these great talented people. How would we do it? And then you might get an idea or two out of that.
That's awesome.
I was going to say, and what company can you start today, and how will you do it? Because it's an opportune time, honestly, if your business has died off because you were in trips or travel and all that, then where do you pivot? Where do you go next where there's opportunity? Well, great. This is it's a movie about cocaine, but it's Massachusetts, and I know you're from Mass. Ray Liotta's quote from Blow is, sometimes you're flush and sometimes you're bust, but when you're up, it's never as good as it seems. And when you're down, you never think you'll be back up again. Right. It's just
so true.
And that's the challenge when the economy's good and your business is good, you don't stop and think, I need to have this in reserves. You're like, how do we invest and scale this thing faster? But you got to keep your antennas up and recognize that there's these patterns every 7 years. And what are the indicators? Nonetheless, have that reserve. So
I'm going to beat Ray. Dig the well, before you're thirsty.
Yeah, all that. That's perfect.
Do that.
So listen, Bill, thanks for having us. Thanks for coming on the show. CatalystGrowthAdvisors.com is where you can get more. I saw there's a media section, so make sure once we send you the links to this episode, you get that on there.
Will do.
And you're always a friend of the show. You're always welcome back. So Further Faster is the name of the book. I'm excited to dig in and see how I can apply it to my business.
Likewise.
If you have any questions, give me a call. Everything's on my site, Calendly, contact info. Again, I love helping people. Do not feel shy, not to you guys, but also to your listeners. Happy to help.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Bill. Thank you, Shavonnah. Thank everybody for listening. Now get out there and close some business. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Central Texas rain's the strongest drink I found.
Thank you for listening to Big Ideas Small Business. Follow us at BISB Media and visit our website at www.bisbmedia.com.